Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she checked her medical supplies one last time. The desert heat in Afghanistan was unbearable. Even at 6 in the morning, she had been deployed with SEAL Team 6 for 3 months now, and every mission felt like walking into the unknown. As the only female combat medic assigned to this elite unit, she knew she had to prove herself every single day. The team was preparing for what intelligence called a routine extraction mission. They needed to pull out an informant who had been feeding them crucial information about Taliban movements in the region. Sarah knew better than to believe any mission was truly routine. In her experience, the word routine was military code for expect the unexpected. Commander Jake Thompson gathered the team around a dusty table covered with maps and satellite photos. His weathered face showed the strain of countless missions, and his voice carried the authority that came with leading men into dangerous situations. Listen up, people. Our asset is located in a compound, approximately 2 miles northeast of our current position. Intelligence suggests minimal resistance, but we go in prepared for anything. Sarah studied the aerial photographs carefully. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills that provided perfect cover for enemy snipers. The single dirt road leading to the target was narrow and exposed, making it a potential kill zone. She mentally cataloged the medical supplies she carried, calculating how much morphine, bandages, and blood-clotting agents she had if things went wrong. The team consisted of 6 highly trained operators, each with their own specialty. There was Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, a heavy weapons specialist whose calm demeanor masked his deadly efficiency. Tommy Chen handled explosives and breaching, his small frame hiding incredible strength and precision. David "Ghost" Williams served as their sniper and reconnaissance expert, able to disappear into any environment. Ryan Kelly managed communications and electronic warfare, keeping them connected to command and jamming enemy signals. Finally, there was Jake Thompson, their leader, whose tactical brilliance had brought them through dozens of successful missions. Sarah had earned her place among these men through months of grueling training and several combat deployments. She had patched up wounded soldiers under enemy fire, performed emergency surgery in the back of moving vehicles, and once even delivered a baby during a civilian evacuation. Despite her proven track record, she still felt the weight of being the only woman on the team. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was tense but quiet. Each team member sat in their own mental space, going through their part of the mission plan. Sarah closed her eyes and visualized potential casualty scenarios, mentally rehearsing the steps she would take for different types of injuries: gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, burns from explosives, broken bones from falls. She had procedures memorized for everything. As they approached the landing zone, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes out. Weather looks good. No visible ground activity. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly. The familiar pre-mission adrenaline starting to flow through her system. She checked her weapon one final time and ensured her medical pack was secure. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and sand. The team moved out quickly, establishing a defensive perimeter while the aircraft lifted off and disappeared into the morning sky. They were now alone in hostile territory, miles from any backup or support. The closest friendly forces were back at their base, more than an hour away by helicopter. Thompson signaled for the team to move out toward their target. They traveled in a tactical formation, with Ghost taking point as their scout, followed by Thompson and Chen. Sarah moved in the middle of the formation with Kelly, while Tank brought up the rear with his machine gun ready to provide covering fire if needed. The terrain was rougher than the satellite photos had suggested. Loose rocks and hidden gullies made movement slow and treacherous. Sarah found herself grateful for the months of physical conditioning that had prepared her for this kind of march. Her medical pack felt heavier with each step, but she knew that every piece of equipment inside could mean the difference between life and death for her teammates. After 40 minutes of careful movement, Ghost held up his fist, signaling the team to stop. Through hand signals, he indicated that he could see the target compound ahead. Thompson moved forward to assess the situation while the rest of the team took defensive positions behind available cover. The compound looked exactly as described in their briefing. A rectangular building with thick mud walls sat in the center of a small clearing. A few outbuildings and animal pens were scattered around the main structure. Most importantly, there were no visible guards or defensive positions. It appeared their informant was telling the truth about the location being lightly defended. Thompson returned to the team and outlined their approach. They would move in 2 groups, with Ghost providing overwatch from a hilltop position, while the rest of the team approached the compound. Sarah would stay with the main group, ready to provide medical support if anyone was injured during the operation. The plan seemed straightforward enough. Get in, locate their asset, verify his identity, and get out. Total time on target should be less than 15 minutes. Sarah had participated in dozens of similar missions, and most of them went exactly according to plan. She had no reason to expect this one would be any different. As they began their final approach to the compound, Sarah noticed something that made her uneasy. The silence was too complete. In her experience, rural Afghan villages always had some signs of life: chickens clucking, goats bleating, or at least the sound of people going about their daily activities. This place felt abandoned, almost like a ghost town. She was about to share her concerns with Thompson when Ghost's voice came through their radio headsets. "I've got movement on the ridgeline to our north, multiple contacts, approximately 800 meters out." Sarah's blood ran cold. They were walking into an ambush. Thompson immediately called for the team to take cover, but it was too late. The first shots rang out from 3 different directions simultaneously. The quiet morning air erupted with the crack of rifle fire and the distinctive whistle of bullets passing overhead. Sarah dove behind a large boulder just as chunks of rock exploded where she had been standing moments before. The team was caught in a carefully planned crossfire. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves on the high ground surrounding the compound, turning the valley floor into a killing zone. Sarah could hear Thompson shouting orders over the radio, trying to coordinate their response while bullets rained down around them. Tank immediately returned fire with his machine gun, sending long bursts toward the enemy positions. The heavy weapon's distinctive sound provided some comfort, but Sarah could tell they were outnumbered and outgunned. Chen was working to identify the best route for withdrawal, while Kelly tried to call for helicopter support. That's when Sarah heard the sound that every combat medic dreads: a teammate screaming in pain. Through the chaos of gunfire, Team Medic Dar, she could see Marcus Rodriguez writhing on the ground about 30 meters away. Blood was spreading across his uniform, and he wasn't moving toward cover like he should have been. Without thinking about her own safety, Sarah grabbed her medical pack and started moving toward the wounded SEAL. Bullets kicked up dust all around her as she ran in a crouch, using whatever cover she could find. Her training took over completely, and all she could think about was reaching her patient and stopping his bleeding. She reached Tank just as another burst of enemy fire forced her to dive to the ground beside him. His left leg was badly damaged, with what appeared to be a compound fracture of the femur. Blood was flowing freely from the wound, and his face was pale with shock. Sarah immediately went to work, applying pressure to control the bleeding while Tank gritted his teeth against the pain. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. More enemy fighters seemed to be joining the battle, and their small team was running low on ammunition. Sarah could hear Thompson on the radio, calling for immediate helicopter extraction, but the pilot's response was not encouraging. Enemy fire was too heavy for the aircraft to safely approach their position. As Sarah worked to stabilize Tank's injury, she heard Tommy Chen cry out from somewhere behind her. Another teammate was down, and the enemy fire was intensifying. She realized with growing horror that they were trapped in an impossible situation. The team couldn't move with wounded men, but staying in place meant certain death or capture. That's when the mortar rounds started falling. The first mortar round exploded 50 meters to their left, sending a shower of rocks and debris flying through the air. Sarah instinctively covered Tank's body with her own, protecting him from the falling stones while she continued working on his leg wound. The explosion left her ears ringing, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. Tommy Chen was calling for help from behind a cluster of rocks about 40 meters away. Sarah could see blood on his right arm, but she couldn't tell how serious the injury was from her position. Ghost was still providing covering fire from his elevated position, but even his accurate shooting couldn't keep all the enemy fighters pinned down. Commander Thompson crawled over to Sarah's position, keeping his head low as bullets continued to snap overhead. His face was grim as he assessed their tactical situation. "We're surrounded and outgunned," he said through gritted teeth. "Helicopter can't get through this fire, and we've got wounded who can't move on their own." Sarah had managed to stop the worst of Tank's bleeding, but his leg needed immediate surgical attention that she couldn't provide in their current position. She had given him morphine for the pain, but he was still conscious and trying to return fire with his sidearm. His dedication to the mission, even while seriously wounded, reminded Sarah why she was proud to serve with these men. Another mortar round impacted closer to their position, this one only 20 meters away. The concussion from the blast knocked Sarah backward, and for a moment she couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched whining in her ears. When her vision cleared, she saw that Thompson had been hit by shrapnel from the explosion. Blood was streaming down the left side of his face from a head wound, and his left arm hung at an odd angle. Sarah realized with growing dread that she now had 3 wounded teammates, and no clear way to evacuate any of them. The enemy fire was too intense for anyone to move, and their ammunition was running dangerously low. Kelly's voice crackled through their radio system, with an update that made the situation even worse. "Command says the quick reaction force is still 40 minutes out. Weather's turned bad back at base, and they're having trouble getting birds in the air." Sarah felt a moment of despair wash over her. 40 minutes might as well be 40 hours given their current situation. They would all be dead or captured long before help arrived. She looked around at her wounded teammates and made a decision that went against every tactical manual she had ever studied. "I'm going to create a distraction," she announced to Thompson, who was trying to stop the bleeding from his head wound with his good hand. "When I do, you need to get everyone ready to move. We're not waiting for extraction." Thompson stared at her with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Martinez, that's not your call to make. I'm still in command here." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, you're wounded and we're out of options. Someone needs to draw their fire so the rest of you can move to better cover. I'm the fastest runner on the team, and I know these hills better than anyone after studying those maps for 3 months. Before Thompson could object further, Sarah was already moving. She grabbed several smoke grenades from her pack and began crawling toward a position that would give her the best angle to create maximum confusion among the enemy fighters. Her plan was simple, but dangerous. Create enough smoke and noise to mask the team's movement, while drawing enemy attention to herself. The terrain worked in her favor as she moved between the rocks and scrub brush. Years of training had taught her how to move quietly and use available cover to remain hidden. She could hear the enemy fighters shouting to each other in multiple languages, trying to coordinate their attack on the trapped Americans below. When Sarah reached her chosen position, she pulled the pins on 3 smoke grenades simultaneously and threw them toward the largest concentration of enemy fighters. Thick, gray smoke began billowing across the hillside, obscuring visibility and creating the confusion she needed. At the same time, she opened fire with her rifle, sending carefully aimed shots toward the enemy positions. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The enemy fighters, thinking they were under attack by a larger force, began firing wildly in all directions. Some of them even started shooting at each other through the smoke, unable to identify their targets clearly. Sarah continued moving between positions, firing short bursts and throwing additional grenades to maintain the illusion of multiple attackers. Her distraction worked exactly as planned. The intense enemy fire that had been focused on her teammate's position shifted toward the smoke and confusion she had created. Thompson seized the opportunity to begin moving his wounded men toward better cover in a small ravine about 100 meters away. But Sarah's bold plan came with a terrible cost. As she moved to throw her last smoke grenade, an enemy sniper who had maintained his discipline finally got a clear shot. The bullet struck her high in the chest, spinning her around and sending her tumbling down a rocky slope. For several long seconds, Sarah lay motionless at the bottom of a small gully, stunned by the impact and struggling to breathe. Her body armor had absorbed most of the bullet's energy, but the force of the impact had knocked the wind out of her and left her disoriented. She could taste blood in her mouth and feel a sharp pain in her ribs where the ceramic plate had cracked. Through the fog of pain and confusion, Sarah could hear Thompson calling her name over the radio. She tried to respond, but couldn't seem to make her voice work properly. Her hands were shaking as she attempted to check her wounds and assess the damage. The bullet had not penetrated her armor, but she was sure she had at least one cracked rib, and possibly internal injuries as well. Enemy fighters were already moving down the hillside toward her position, shouting commands and coordinate their search. Sarah realized that they thought they had killed or seriously wounded one of the Americans, and they wanted to capture her for intelligence purposes. She forced herself to remain perfectly still, playing dead while they approached. 2 Taliban fighters reached her position first, speaking rapidly in Pashto as they examined her motionless form. One of them kicked her roughly in the side, sending a spike of agony through her damaged ribs. Sarah bit down hard on her tongue to keep from crying out, tasting more blood as she maintained her deception. The fighters were arguing about whether to take her back to their commander or search her for intelligence materials right there. Sarah understood enough of their language to know they thought she was either dead or dying. She used their momentary distraction to slowly move her hand toward the emergency medical supplies on her belt. When the fighters finally moved away to search for other casualties, Sarah forced herself to sit up and take stock of her situation. Her chest felt like someone was stabbing her with every breath, and her left shoulder was numb from where she had landed on the rocks. But she was alive, conscious, and still armed. More importantly, she could see that her distraction had worked. Through the smoke and chaos, she spotted her teammates moving successfully toward the ravine position. Thompson was helping Tank, while Chen, despite his own arm wound, was providing security for their movement. They had gained precious time and better defensive positions, but they were still trapped and surrounded. Sarah realized that the enemy fighters would soon discover she wasn't actually dead, and then her teammates would be back in the same impossible situation as before. She needed to do something decisive to change the tactical balance. Something that would give her team a real chance at survival. That's when she remembered the emergency radio beacon in her medical pack. If she could reach it and activate the device, it would send their exact coordinates to any friendly aircraft in the area. But the beacon was designed to be used only in the most desperate circumstances, because it would also reveal their position to every enemy force monitoring military communications. Sarah made her decision. She crawled back up the rocky slope toward where she had dropped her medical pack, moving as quietly as possible to avoid detection. Enemy fighters were still searching the area, but the smoke from her grenades provided enough concealment for her to retrieve the beacon without being spotted. As she activated the emergency signal, Sarah whispered a prayer that someone friendly was close enough to receive it. She had just painted a target on all of their positions, but it was their only chance for survival. Now she had to find a way to reach her wounded teammates and help them hold out until help arrived. Sarah's emergency beacon had been active for only 3 minutes when she heard the distinctive sound of aircraft engines in the distance. But her relief was short-lived when she realized the approaching aircraft were not American helicopters. The sound was wrong. Too heavy and too slow for the quick, nimble birds she was expecting. Enemy reinforcements were arriving by helicopter, which meant their already desperate situation was about to become completely hopeless. Sarah counted at least 2 aircraft approaching their position, each one probably carrying 8 to 10 additional fighters. Her small team would soon be facing odds of more than 5 to 1. She had to reach her teammates and warn them about the incoming threat. Despite the pain in her chest and the risk of being spotted by enemy search teams, Sarah began making her way toward the ravine where Thompson had moved the wounded men. Every step sent sharp jolts through her damaged ribs, but she forced herself to keep moving. The terrain provided some concealment as she moved between rocks and scraggly bushes. She could hear enemy fighters calling to each other as they continued searching for casualties from her earlier distraction. Several times she had to freeze in place as armed men passed within a few meters of her position, their weapons ready and their eyes scanning for any sign of movement. When Sarah finally reached the edge of the ravine, she was shocked by what she found. Thompson was unconscious, his head wound having proved more serious than initially apparent. Chen was trying to treat both Thompson and Tank with limited medical supplies, despite his own arm injury. Tank was drifting in and out of consciousness from blood loss and pain medication. Kelly looked up as Sarah appeared at the edge of their defensive position. His face showed a mixture of relief and concern as he helped her down into the ravine. "We thought you were dead," he whispered urgently. We heard the shot and saw you go down. Sarah quickly explained about the approaching enemy helicopters and the activation of their emergency beacon. Kelly's expression grew even more grave as he processed the information. With Thompson unconscious, he was now the senior NCO and effectively in command of their desperate little band. Ghost is still in position on the hilltop, Kelly reported quietly. He's been picking off enemy fighters, but he's running low on ammunition. We've got maybe 10 minutes before those helicopters land, and we're completely overrun. Sarah immediately went to work on Thompson's head wound, using her remaining medical supplies to stop the bleeding and check for signs of serious brain injury. His pupils were responsive and his breathing was steady, which suggested a concussion rather than something more life-threatening. She managed to wake him up with smelling salts from her emergency kit. Thompson came around slowly, blinking in confusion before his tactical awareness returned. When Sarah briefed him on the situation, his face hardened with determination. Despite his injuries, he was still their commanding officer, and he wasn't about to let his team be captured or killed without a fight. We need to consolidate our position and prepare for their final assault, Thompson said through gritted teeth. Kelly, get Ghost back down here. We'll make our stand in this ravine and hope help arrives before we run out of ammunition. Sarah was about to respond when her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. A calm, professional voice came through their headsets speaking with an American accent. Broken Arrow. This is Guardian Angel. We have your emergency beacon and are 5 minutes out. Recommend you mark your position with smoke and prepare for immediate extraction. The relief that flooded through Sarah was almost overwhelming. Guardian Angel was the call sign for a specialized rescue unit that operated the most advanced combat helicopters in the American arsenal. If they were truly only 5 minutes away, her team might actually survive this nightmare. But Thompson's response was more cautious. Guardian Angel. Be advised we are surrounded by superior numbers, with wounded requiring immediate medical attention. Landing zone is under heavy enemy fire with reinforcements approaching. The pilot's response was immediate and confident. Copy that. Broken Arrow. We're equipped for hot extractions. Just keep your heads down and trust us to do our job. Sarah could already hear the change in the battlefield sounds around them. The enemy fighters had also heard the radio transmission and were beginning to converge on their position. The 2 Taliban helicopters had landed somewhere beyond the ridgeline, and she could hear shouts as fresh fighters moved to join the battle. Thompson began issuing rapid orders despite his head injury. Kelly, collect all remaining ammunition and distribute it evenly. Chen, help me get tank ready to move. We may need to reach an alternate landing zone. Sarah, prepare the wounded for transport and be ready to provide medical support during extraction. Sarah worked quickly to stabilize her 3 wounded teammates for movement. She gave Tank an additional dose of morphine and secured his damaged leg with an improvised splint. Thompson's head wound had stopped bleeding, but she was concerned about possible concussion symptoms affecting his judgment. Chen's arm wound was painful, but not life-threatening, and she wrapped it tightly to provide support. The sound of approaching American helicopters grew louder, but so did the enemy fire directed at their position. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from dozens of weapons as Taliban fighters attempted to prevent the rescue. Bullets were striking the rocks around their ravine with increasing frequency, sending chips of stone flying through the air. Ghost's voice came over their radio from his hilltop position. I count approximately 40 enemy fighters converging on your location. Guardian Angel, you're going to have company when you arrive. The lead rescue helicopter's response was calm and professional. Copy that, Ghost. We've dealt with welcoming committees before. Stand by for fire support. What happened next was like something from an action movie. The 2 Guardian Angel helicopters appeared over the ridgeline, moving fast and low, their door gunners already engaging enemy positions. The lead aircraft was equipped with rockets and a chain gun, and it immediately began systematically destroying enemy fighting positions with devastating accuracy. The second helicopter moved toward a small clearing about 50 meters from Sarah's position, its crew chief already lowering a rescue cable. But the landing zone was still under heavy fire, and the pilot was struggling to maintain a stable hover while enemy bullets struck his aircraft. Thompson made a command decision that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. "We're going to have to carry our wounded to that helicopter," he announced. "Sarah, you take Tank. Kelly, you've got Chen. I'll cover our movement." Sarah looked at Tank, who outweighed her by at least 60 pounds, and wondered how she was going to carry him across 50 meters of open ground under enemy fire. But there wasn't time to debate the plan. The rescue helicopter couldn't wait much longer without taking critical damage from enemy weapons. She helped Tank to his feet and got him into a fireman's carry position, placing most of his weight across her shoulders. The damaged SEAL warrior was barely conscious from pain medication, but he managed to wrap his arms around her neck to help secure their connection. Sarah took a deep breath, ignored the screaming pain in her damaged ribs, and started running toward the helicopter. The next 50 meters felt like 50 miles. Bullets kicked up dirt all around them as Sarah struggled across the uneven ground with Tank's weight threatening to bring them both down. Her legs felt like rubber, and her chest burned with every breath. But she kept moving toward the sound of the helicopter's rotors. Halfway to the aircraft, Sarah stumbled and nearly fell. Tank's weight combined with her own injuries had pushed her beyond her physical limits. For a moment, she thought they were both going to die just meters short of safety. That's when she felt additional hands helping to support Tank's weight. Kelly had reached them, having successfully delivered Chen to the helicopter. Together, they managed to get Tank to the aircraft and onto the rescue cable. The crew chief immediately began lifting the wounded SEAL into the helicopter, while Sarah collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. But their ordeal wasn't over yet. Thompson was still pinned down in the ravine by enemy fire, and Ghost was trapped on his hilltop position, with no clear route to the landing zone. Sarah forced herself back to her feet, despite every muscle in her body screaming in protest. "I'm going back for Thompson," she announced to Kelly, who stared at her in disbelief. "Sarah, you can barely stand. Let me go get him." But Sarah was already moving back toward the ravine, driven by a determination that surprised even herself. She had brought these men into this fight, and she was going to make sure they all went home alive. Behind her, Kelly was coordinating Ghost's evacuation, while the Guardian Angel helicopters continued their devastating attack on enemy positions. Sarah found Thompson exactly where she had left him, bleeding and dazed but still returning fire with his sidearm. When he saw her approaching, his expression mixed relief with frustration. "I told you to get to that helicopter, Martinez." "Not without you, sir," Sarah replied simply. She helped him to his feet and got him into the same fireman's carry position she had used with Tank. Thompson was lighter but more alert, which made him both easier and harder to carry across the dangerous ground. The return trip to the helicopter felt even longer than the first one. Enemy fire had intensified as more fighters arrived on the battlefield, and Sarah could feel Thompson flinch as bullets passed close to their bodies. Her legs were shaking with exhaustion, and black spots were beginning to appear at the edges of her vision. Just as Sarah thought she couldn't take another step, strong hands reached out to help her. The helicopter crew chief had rappelled down from his aircraft to assist with the evacuation. Together, they got Thompson onto the rescue cable and began lifting him toward safety. As Sarah was finally pulled into the helicopter herself, she looked back to see Ghost rappelling down from his hilltop position under covering fire from the second aircraft. In a matter of minutes, the entire team had been successfully extracted from what had seemed like certain death. During the flight back to base, Sarah worked with the helicopter's medical team to stabilize her wounded teammates. Tank would need surgery on his leg. Thompson required observation for his head injury, and Chen's arm wound needed proper cleaning and stitching. But they were all alive, conscious, and going home. As she sat back and finally allowed herself to relax, Sarah realized that she had just experienced something extraordinary. She had faced her greatest fear, losing teammates under her care, and had found the strength to overcome seemingly impossible odds. The other SEALs looked at her with a new level of respect and admiration. Word of Sarah's heroic actions spread quickly through the military community. Within days, she was being recommended for one of the highest decorations for valor available to American service members. But for Sarah, the real reward was simpler than any medal or recognition. She had proven to herself and others that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing what needed to be done despite the fear. She had carried her wounded teammates to safety not because she was stronger or braver than anyone else, but because she refused to leave them behind. In that moment, she had embodied the deepest values of military service and medical care. Years later, when people asked Sarah about that day in Afghanistan, she would always deflect attention from her own actions and focus on the teamwork that made their survival possible. But her teammates never forgot the sight of their medic rising from what appeared to be certain death to carry them one by one to safety. That image, of Sarah Martinez standing up when everyone thought she had fallen, then methodically rescuing each of her wounded comrades, became legendary within the SEAL community. It represented everything they valued about courage under fire, loyalty to teammates, and the refusal to accept defeat even in the face of overwhelming odds. Sarah continued serving as a combat medic for several more years, participating in dozens of successful missions. But she never again faced a situation quite like that desperate morning in the Afghan mountains. She had been tested in the crucible of combat and had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a true hero whose actions saved the lives of 3 of America's finest warriors.